Alright, so welcome. Some of you I've met already, some of you I haven't. I'm Erica Nadelheft. I teach World Civ and basically everything that is not American and Canadian history here at UMFK, and my colleague Paul Buck, who does all the American and the Canadian, as well as Spanish and education. Being a small campus, we tend to wear a lot of different hats. And I guess I wanted to start first by sort of finding out who you are, where you are, and I know, at least according to what we got from Scott Bazin, you all do U.S. history or government. So, but at the same time, I think many of my concerns and comments and whatnot are applicable to any history class or any early college class. So the fact that I do the World Civ hopefully won't throw you off when I start the conversation. But if you just tell me sort of who you are, what you do, and then I'll jump right into my conversation.
I'm Julie Latusha, and I teach at Edwardsville High School in Auburn, and I teach AP U.S. history.
This is probably all unique, but my name is Craig Latusha. I am married to Julie. We teach the same high school in the same department. We teach the same content area just about. She teaches AP American history. I teach AP American government. I teach freshman government, and I teach American history one class. I'm at level 3 now. I've been teaching Amarillo for 15 years.
That works, got it.
My name is Kai Budig, and I teach AP U.S. history at Madawaska High School in Alaska.
I'm Shannon Matthews, and I teach at Southern Rustic. I've taught for 21 years, and I teach everything. I'm the only person in my department. I teach civics to freshmen, world history to sophomores, U.S. history, and I have various levels of U.S. history. I taught the Bridge Year program through UMA, and so there's a college U.S. history. I teach honors history, and I used to teach psychology.
You wear more hats than we do. So, and my goal, I think, in this conversation, because I don't want to stand up here and lecture, I'd like it to be much more a conversation, is to find out what you need from us, as well as sort of what we hope, to give you. So if you have questions, or I'd like to make sure too at the end of it that we have various emails, so that if you think of something and say, hey, could I see a syllabus, or could we continue a conversation, that you feel free to contact us and to stay in communication and conversation with us. Because I've been teaching the early college for quite a while now. Obviously I get the students in my online classes from main high schools where the classes are offered at the high school, and yet I felt very disconnected from rural U and early college because they just randomly appear on my class list. I have no sense of what goes on outside of my own online class, what other teachers are doing. The only time we sort of hear about a history class being offered is when we get the resume to approve the the high school faculty, comes to me and to Paul. Scott says, what do you think, should they, and we give our approval. But other than that, I felt very disconnected, and I don't know what you're doing, I don't know how you're doing it. I only recently learned that you actually see our syllabi to get started. So, so some of the things that I was thinking about when I was, kind of stewing over, okay, what should we talk about, what might be most useful? And so I thought what I would do is bring in some examples of the types of things I have my students do. And to see if there's any, how it corresponds to what you do. And the concerns that I have that the high school classes that are offered, the college classes that are offered at the high school are really college level classes. And that they're not sort of AP classes or sort of glorified high school classes, that the difference is recognized. in the types of thinking that we require students to do in college, and the types of work that we do, the assignments that we give, the types of exams that we give. And obviously Paul and I are not the same person. You know, we work well together, we do not share a brain, we teach differently, we do different types of exams. But I think the standards and the types of thought that we expect out of the students are the same. And I'm sure that you're doing very, very similar things, but since there hasn't been a conversation between us, in a sense, how do we know? And so what I did to start with is I printed out, if I can even find it, one of the articles. So this is something I have every single class, every Gen Ed class, World Civ class that I teach. I have them sort of start with this article, and you will notice by the name it was written by my dad, who was an American historian, about being a history teacher and what it means not just to teach history but to study history. It's very important to me as a historian that students don't just come into my classes, memorize dates, forget them a week after the exam, and what's the reason for that? Why bother studying history if that's all you're going to get out of it? Like, why do we, we've all clearly chosen to teach this because we feel it's important. And it's relevant and it matters. And how do we bring that to our students and say this isn't about memorization, or it shouldn't be only about memorization? I expect my students to get the general decade, if they're writing about the French Revolution, to know it was, the end of the 18th century, not tell me the 16th century. If they don't get 1789, I really don't care. And I find many of my students come in and they're prepared to memorize, to read the textbook, what do I need to know for the test? And get in the class and get out of the class. And I don't see history as being, memorizing useless information or learning something simply to say, I know when the French Revolution happened. I want them to think about history as being relevant, as being important in the present day. If we're going to understand what's happening in the world today, we need to understand context and historical context. And if we see something on the news about the Middle East, if we don't understand the history of a place, we make judgments and we make decisions that are, sort of maybe completely wrong, and yet are going to impact many, many people. And so I try to teach from that perspective, or from that place, that this actually matters to you as individuals, as human beings, as people in Maine, as Americans, as world citizens. And so I always start them off with this. I give them no warning. I say, read this article, write a reaction paper to it. Just want to know what you think, about anything in this article. I've had people love it. I've had students who hated it, who've said, not noticing that it's actually, it's actually my father, and then afterwards they're, but I don't care. Like, I want them to have an opinion, and I often ask them to go back to it at the end of the semester, and see if their reaction to it or to history has changed at the end of my classes. And then what I did for you is I printed out a couple of assignments, the types of assignments, types of things I'm asking my students to do, and 2 just sample exams that I've given over the years at the end of world history. I ask only essay questions for my exams. I know Paul does slightly different exams. When I'm annoyed, I will often give a pop quiz. If I feel like they're coming into class unprepared, I'll say, fine, put away your books. Here's 10 multiple choice questions. But I don't do those as a matter of course. What matters to me in teaching college history is that students learn to analyze, to think critically about an issue, and to be able to have an opinion. I find so many of my students, the freshmen that I get, who haven't necessarily taken an early college class, they're afraid to have an original idea because it might be wrong. you know, and I'll toss out a question. I'm one of those lecturers who I'm constantly throwing out questions that as soon as they absolutely, it's like you get the deer in the headlights look. And they're afraid to have an opinion about the material that I'm talking about. And I really want them to be confident enough to say, this is what I think, to learn to articulate their opinions and to back them up. I mean, you know, an opinion just, well, this is bad because I don't like it. You know, that's not, you know, that doesn't work. But I think this was wrong, or I think this happened because, and then to back themselves up. To make connections between different moments in history and how something that happened, you know, in the 17th century actually still playing out today. So much of what I do, you know, in World Civ, for example, when we study the transatlantic slave trade, you know, starting with Portugal and West Africa and the Caribbean and whatnot. And we all learn about certainly the slave trade, you know, in North America, we learn about the Civil War and whatnot. And then we all assume, well, we thought the Civil War and slavery ended. And so I have them then go and do research on 21st century slavery, since slavery is a bigger issue in the world today than it was during the transatlantic slave trade. And they're blown away. And they say, why don't we know this? Like, why have we never learned this? Why does nobody talk about this? Or why have we missed it, you know, on the news? And so they start to see how, you know, something that they simply learned about in, you know, junior high school history class or whatnot, actually is still playing out. It's changed, it's transformed, it's happening in different places, but it's alive and well. We'll do the agricultural revolution, you know, in England and then spreading to Europe and whatnot, and how, you know, the positive and the negative changes that happen because of that. And then I'll make them watch something like Food Inc. and look at the agricultural revolution and changes in our food supply today, so that they can see these things long term and think about them and understand that it's really affecting them, that these issues really matter in the world today. And so that history can become not just, you know, memorizing a list of presidents to pass your exam. I mean, we should all, you know, it's useful on Jeopardy.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in a sense, how does that help you understand your world? How does that help you become, I won't say a different human being, but
More rounded.
a well-rounded human being
critical.
and a critical thinker and an empathetic human being. I mean, I think history helps us teach empathy. Because as we learn about others and we learn about other experiences, we learn that other people's experiences matter to them as much as our own experiences matter to us. And increasingly, I feel as if our world doesn't have a lot of empathy for others. And there are a lot of places where there is no tolerance and there's very quick judgment. And we don't see people who are different. And by we, I don't, you know, it's not a personal we, it's sort of, you know, general we. But we often don't see them as of the same value as we are. But when we can really put ourselves in the place of others and understand their experiences, and that even though they're not ours and we may experience things differently, those experiences are just as valuable and they matter, then I think it opens up, you know, communication and understanding, and it changes our decision making, whether it be political or social or economic or whatnot. So those are the types of things I really try to do in my classes and in my assignments. I do a lot with women's history in class, you know, in every study. I focus a lot on women, I focus on minorities, I focus on religious history. And I guess on a sort of a different note, my other concern, you know, some of my other concerns are, I find that, again, I think she was addressing this a little bit earlier, you know, in the lecture that we had about rural schools, is that gap between high school and college. And I find a lot of my first year students expect that a college class is run sort of the same way high school classes. In that, you know, I give assignments, I post them online. I don't often, you know, sometimes I'll mention them in class, and I say, look, every Sunday, you know, get on Blackboard. The assignments, the reading assignment, the writing assignment, everything's there. If you have questions, let me know. But I don't then remind them, okay, your assignment's going to be due every day, you know, it's going to be due in 2 days. And then the assignment comes due and they haven't done it. And they say, well, you didn't remind us. I said, well, I'm not your mother. You know, this is college. This isn't high school. This is college. And that gap between, you know, and I have no sense of how things run in these, you know, dual enrollment classes. But I do find that the preparation level often of the first year students here is, they're not quite there, you know, yeah, we have to sort of start with teaching them, okay, how do you come to class prepared? You know, if I've given a reading assignment, I expect it to be read, you know, to have been read and for you to come prepared to talk about it. And that usually takes me a good couple of weeks to get them, you know, to say, oh, she really meant it, you know, as opposed to, yeah.
I have to stop you there because you're talking about your normal first year students.
Right.
I provide a unit, or we separate them into periods, calendar for my kids.
Great.
They have all the assignments listed. They're held accountable for it. I never mention it in class. They pass
That's great.
it.
So that's one of the questions, reasons
But what
I
I'm
have a
saying is
question.
that AP is
Yeah.
different than the rest of your first year students.
Okay.
It
That's
really
good,
is.
yeah.
We are held to the standard of the College Board. We have to teach contextualization, argumentation, use of evidence, synthesis. This is all new to the kids. So we're teaching them how to make these connections between period and period and period. We're teaching them how to think critically and how to make arguments and back them up. So when you're using your first year students as examples, it's not the students that we have. Because the students that we have,
One of my questions.
what
right,
we're held to in terms of the College Board, our syllabus that we need to pass into the College Board is more intensive than the syllabus that we need to have for you guys. So we're held to a higher standard, so our kids are held to a higher standard. So the ones that you're seeing are not the ones who are APUSH students or AP
Right.
government students. So what you're saying that you want us to do, we are doing. At least I know
That's
that I
good.
am, and I'm not the only person. I have students who get 5s on their AP exam, so I know I'm holding them. I'm putting their feet to the fire and I'm holding them to a higher standard. So we are doing this stuff.
Good.
We
You
really
know, and then that was
are.
one of my
Having
questions.
said that, we still have to teach 500 years of history.
You have to teach what?
500 years of history
Right.
in 8
right,
months.
Yeah, yeah. So my
Yeah,
question
pretty
too,
much
a little
you
bit,
asked the
was
high school
less
kids
about
that
the
way 4
AP
years
than
ago.
about the
Dual enrollment, but
dual enrollment
the fact that we're
classes.
dual enrollment, the reason why we're dual enrollment is because we're AP. We wouldn't be dual enrollment if we weren't AP.
Okay, so that, again, that's another one of
Yeah.
my questions is, and that's the disconnect between us as faculty here, not knowing what you're doing.
Right.
And not being told what we're doing. And what we find with, you know, the dual enrollment class kids that I get in these classes, you know, who are put into online world civ, you know, and it says, you know, high school student, you know, we can see
And
on
this
that.
may be a kid who's never
Who are
taken
not-
AP
yeah,
course in the school.
Yeah, who are in the rural U or the dual enrollment classes
Right.
as opposed to the AP classes and
That's different.
yeah, and so that was, you know, was not meant at all to say, I don't think you're doing this in AP.
Oh,
you
no,
know,
and I'm not
so
saying that.
I was not in any way meaning to,
And I'm not saying that too, but I just wanted you to know like what we do
Oh,
so
yeah.
you could understand that in terms of AP or history, AP government. I'm
there
speaking
were
for you,
very
but
much
I'm
the
just
same,
saying
yeah.
That we are holding them to a very high standard.
And that's,
Ours is completely different. We have AP online. We don't have any AP teachers at Southern Aroostook. And our kids, they're all in together. So you've got kids with a second grade reading level in with our kids that should be in college classes because we just are supposed to differentiate in our classes. So with even our bridge year kids
Yeah.
that they took, the bridge program was supposed to be the lower 25% to the 75%. It wasn't the top kids. And so for the bridge program that we did through UMA, we've got kids with 3rd, 4th grade reading level taking these college classes. We were trying to encourage them, that's what the bridge program was, to bridge that gap and to show them that they could do the work. It was much hand-holding, okay? So it was very difficult, and when we got doing it, we said, geez, you know, a lot of these kids just don't have the study skills, and so it was a constant reminder. I mean, I had them for a study hall at the end of the day, after they'd had all of their classes, and we would do a calendar together of what was due. I mean, that's, and we're on standards-based grading, and so it's, you can hand it in when you get it done. There's no accountability, you don't take points off if something is late. So I'm coming from a completely different place.
You are.
And so our kids are going to have a hard adjustment to, this is great. But that's not the way high school is for us now. And I have to say, as a teacher that's gone through this process, it's very frustrating.
And I think it's frustrating because we are all in such a different place. We're dealing with different places. We have students in such different places with such different backgrounds, and there's sort of no warning. You know, when you get that class in September and you have no idea where it's going to be, and how do we support one another and work with, you know, each other and, you know, help one another to understand where these, you know, because then again, you get them in the college class, you know, and the high school kids are thrown into the online class with the college kids. And, okay, what do? How do we keep the standards up here and yet help those who have no idea how to, you know, okay, do the assignment, look up when the assignment is due, remember to print not 10 minutes on the way into class, because we have such a variety, such a gap.
This is though, it was a long time ago, but my freshman year in college, I mean, I had to learn that. I didn't know that we had prelims and then a final and that was it, and then you had to follow your syllabus. So who taught me? I don't remember that. You know, how did we learn that?
Figured it out.
We figured it
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
We figured it out,
Yeah.
and nobody, and if you didn't do it, you failed.
Yeah.
And that's where I kind of hop into having taught secondary school, although it was language, it was still that I always say that is part of my pedagogical DNA, even at this level, in that I had many students, like Shannon mentioned, who need that extra assistance. And that very first semester, HGY 102, US History 1, I always let them know, I try to reassure them that I taught high school. I have a sense perhaps where you're coming from, but now that we're all adults, and I always say that, now that we're all adults here, we do need to have a higher level of responsibility. I will help you, and I notice a marked difference between the way that I teach in the fall and in the spring with my first year students.
Right.
So, and that's kind of to get to your point. Kai, right? Yeah. See something. It's Jim out of West Coast. Yeah, okay. So, to get to your point is just that I try to use my own professional experience when I was at Wisdom for a year teaching French, but I also was down in Maryland for 7 years teaching French and Spanish. So I try to use that as our first year students get integrated into a history or just into college in general, you know, to help them, for those who are different than the AP students and the honors students that you mentioned, to help them integrate that. So I do a fair amount of handholding the first semester, especially for those who need it. But second semester, I have a very, very different approach because they've already had a semester on the other level.
So the fact that you're mentioning that, is this a more prevalent trend? Is that why?
I don't know if it's more prevalent or it's because of where we are, some of the issues that Mara was talking about, because we are, you know, in rural Maine, and we have a lot of first-generation college students. Often who, certainly many of mine, are putting themselves through college, whose parents either can't afford to or won't, who don't come from a background of higher education, and sort of valuing higher education for its own sake, or it's I'm coming to UMFK to get a job. So I think we're dealing with a different population in first-year students than are, say, some of the big schools in Massachusetts or places like that. And certainly it's something I've grappled with students who are working 4 jobs. And for whom those jobs are as important as the education. Whereas my college experience, I went to college. I wasn't allowed to work. My parents didn't let me work. Your job was to go to college and to get that education and to do something with it. But we serve, I think, a very different population. And certainly it's been a learning experience for me because I came into UMFK thinking, okay, I went to Brandeis, I went to graduate school in Jerusalem, and here I'm going to come and I'm going to teach like I was a TA at Brandeis. And I'm like, what? You can't do that. The students are different. They're not better or worse, they're different. It's a different population, and I very quickly had to change, my way of thinking, and it gets frustrating at times when, you do a lot of hand-holding.
Well, then maybe we should have something in the high school, the senior year, they have personal career management. Maybe there should be a unit in there about how to go about your first semester in college. All these little things that we assume that they would know.
Right. They don't. Or at least many of them don't.
Suggested.
And
But clearly you're doing in the AP classes,
But
but
that's
that's a
only a handful of
specific
students.
population.
Exactly.
It's, my fear,
yeah, I was just going to say, to kind of dovetail with what you said, Con, I think it is already being done, but there's a difference between theory and practice. So once they hit the ground, it's nice for them to have it. In most schools, including here I was at Wisdom, as well as the 7 years down in Maryland. Now, some of that were in college, private prep schools too, so that's different. But still, even the high school where I went was a large public school. It's about the size of Bangor High, so it's Annapolis. The point is that even there, for the students who are even thinking about college, there were 30 years ago there were courses or special presentations to help those students. But again, theory versus practice are two entirely different things.
Right.
So, but at least giving them that theory is better than not giving them the theory at all.
Well, it would help you guys.
That's it. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I don't want to veer too much away from history. On the other hand, what I want this to be is what's useful to you more than, what might be useful to me and Paul. But because we are sort of meshing, high school, and I assume it's mostly juniors and seniors, with college, how can we make this, I don't want to say seamless, but an easier transition, and one where, we sort of are all on the same page, but you're dealing with, first generation students and parents. And my experience, again, is that for many of the parents, it's a very scary experience when your kids are going off to school. And, well, are they smarter than we are? Are they going to look down on us and our way of life? And it can be threatening, too, to a parent. When your child is going in a very different direction and being told to value things that maybe you didn't or weren't able to have in your life. So we've got so much sort of background and context with these students going into early college and dual enrollment and then moving into college that played a much bigger role, I found, for me, in my work with students. And I really had to rethink how I was teaching. And so, again, I was bringing these things up, wondering how much of it sort of rings true for you as well in the early college classes that you're doing. And so,
Most of the kids that will take our role will be students with better work habits.
yeah.
And oftentimes, a lot of the ones that have been in the classes with all the differentiation. They want to be in a class that they can move, they can go faster, they can have those deeper conversations, and there's not, the discipline issues or anything like that. So I think it will be better, with the rural view and stuff. But one thing I just try to remember is that they are children, and
They are,
we've got 16-year-olds
Right.
that are juniors, 17-year-olds, and they're, in between there, and it's going to be a lot of learning and growing for them.
But one thing, if I can help, and I'd like to
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm gonna
show-
turn over the lectern for a little bit.
Thanks.
Do you want me to turn the lights off?
Yeah, just 1 second would be fine, if you don't mind, since you're the one piece that I would,
You sure just one?
yeah, one's fine, yeah. Is the essay questions. I wanted to kind of dovetail from what Erica was talking about. My exams are a bit different. I tend to be a little bit more of the old school college, that at least what I had when I was in college, and most of my classmates. Basically, 3 exams, a book review. That's what I do in U.S. history. And indeed, there's not as much formative assessment. I'm going to put on my education hat. There's a lot of summative. However, the final exam though, I tend not to do a cumulative finding. I do it on the last chapters that we cover, so as to cut them a break, because I can still assess their skills, educational skills, without having them go all the way back to the beginning of the course. I'm more, of course, about the, as we know in Bloom's taxonomy, creation, which is the new summit of Bloom's taxonomy, instead of evaluation and analysis before. Just like we mentioned, Kai, and I look at you because you mentioned your students. You're already doing this, but that's what I go for on Bloom's taxonomy, more so than the bottom, the knowledge piece, knowledge acquisition, etc. It's more about theory, but also practice, evaluating trends, interdependencies, how things happen, processes, why things happen, reasons in history as well. So I just kind of put up my essays here. It may be a bit hard for you to see, and I can send these by, I'll just start with the first ones. Now, number 1 has explained that should be analyzed, but what is the Cold War, for example? So this is clearly from US 103, History 103. What is the Cold War? A lot of our students now, I would imagine, just because all of us are over 20-something years old, clearly, because we're teaching. So all of us grew up at the end of the Cold War. So we all know what it is, even as human beings, let alone as historians. But our students today, we're not even millennials anymore, we're into Generation Z. So we have to kind of gear our teaching to that reality that most of them don't know a divided Germany. They don't know what the Cold War was. They don't even know the Soviet Union because they weren't born, right? So they know Russia and the 14 former republics. So again, number 1 seems like for us kind of a no-brainer because we grew up with the Cold War, plus we're historians. But for most of my students, this takes a great deal of explanation, a great deal of preparation. You have to prepare, I'm thinking in French, préparer le terrain. You got to get the ground ready for it, basically, so that they're able to analyze what the Cold War is and all of the tensions, etc., the crises that come from it. So this is kind of what I would do on my exam. Now, essays on mine are 60% of the final grade. I call them extended short answers because it's timed. They do it, the whole exam is an hour and 20 minutes, 25 multiple choice, 15 short answers, 3 out of 5 essays. I let them choose so they can play to their strengths and their interests on the essays. So with this, I know that in a timed exam, I'm not going to get the most developed thought. I'm not going to get things that are perfectly spelled. I'm not going to get even all of the ideas that they may have floating in their heads that they want to get onto paper. But at least it gives me some kind of framework. It gives me some base as to what they're doing. So I always there's a reason why the essays are 60%, because I do want to value this whole idea of evaluation, analysis, creation as well. So this gives you at least an idea. And I put this up because this is my favorite period to teach, basically, the 50s and the 60s as well as the 1920s in US history. I love teaching them. So I decided to play to my own strength and interest in doing this here. So the question would be, of course, and again, talking to education folks, how do I differentiate? The biggest differentiation here, not so much in modification of curriculum, but to accommodate those who basically are maybe not interested in the Cold War. The way that I differentiate is by giving them sometimes 6 different types of essay questions. So again, they can choose what would play to their best strength, basically. So with the multiple choice, most of the time it is kind of fact-based. There's no doubt. Most of it's fact-based. However, there might be a question like, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head, there might be a question like, what were some of the tensions during the New Deal era under FDR? How did he have to make his coalition, I would say, appease basically Southern social democrats, but who still believed, progressives in the Southern sense, still believing in segregation, yes, but being progressives in every other sense of the term. So again, even the term progressive is extremely problematic unless you explain it. And I talk about how it varies, kind of like Mara was talking about today with the definition of rural. Same thing with progressive. I explained that progressivism doesn't necessarily mean that everybody believed in racial equality. No, absolutely not. So that's an issue as well. Southern Tenant Farmers Union, this kind of. So again, it's very interesting, and I try to weave that into my multiple choice questions as much as I can. Not just talking about who, what, and where, yes, but also even some of the how and the why and the variations that come. And same with the short answers. They can go from one word up to a couple of sentences usually. So that's what an exam would look like, and I can send one around to everybody if you'd like as well. I'm going to put up this Bloom's taxonomy that all of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. What I do...
You know that
the
state is a Marzano state, so we're going to be using Marzano's
levels. Okay, yes.
Marzano's taxonomy.
Okay.
You're going to see that a lot.
Nice. And that's good for me to know. I've heard of it, but I've never really used it, so that's good. You're right.
Yeah.
So awesome. So, and that's good for me for my education hat. When we teach our own students, that's going to be something that's going to be good for me to put in my multiculturals that I have. So, thank you so much. Every class, I will start off with a PowerPoint. That's how I teach my US classes. I lecture without notes on purpose. You prepare the text ahead of time, you go back through it, but I like to keep it spontaneous. And when my students have questions, they can just hop right in. And another difference too for me, now I know obviously having been a secondary teacher, it's all Mr. Or Ms. I understand that. But at this level, I prefer they call me Paul. And my early college, high school students, my rural youth students, they're college students. So I offer them the same possibility for using nomenclature, just call me Paul. But this basically is the executive order that leads to the desegregation of the military in 1948 under Harry Truman. And one thing that I usually do is set this up as, what do you think of as being the most important part of the modern civil rights movement? That term modern, that adjective is extremely slippery as well. When I mean modern in this sense, I'm talking about 1940s through the 1960s, basically. Many people look at Rosa Parks, 1955, December 55, not giving up her seat. That's very clear. But the one piece that I, as a historian, would posit, but I also ask my students for their take on this, is actually desegregation of the armed forces in 48. That affects so many people that are going to war together in a foxhole together, and they need each other across racial lines. Up until then, of course, the vast majority of the military was segregated. Yes, you had black troops, you had colored troops, as they were called at the time. But Korea would be the very first time that you would see integrated troops. So I talk about that, but you can also make other make other assertions about this too. I've had, especially a lot of my sports fans, baseball fans, of course, Jackie Robinson. Many see that as the biggest symbol, anyway, of a move toward integration. Of course, this would be 1947. But one thing that I do is talking about interdependencies, and Erica's talked about it a little bit. Interdependencies in history, I find, are very important. And I think, again, like you said, Kai and Julie and Craig, like you mentioned, you're already kind of doing this, talking about interdependencies. We can't look at U.S. history in a vacuum. And especially, and where are you from again? We're little in Lewiston, okay. It's interesting because Lewiston, of course, has a very heavy French influence as well, like up here, but it's different, very different, as we both know, as all three of us, all four of us, everyone in the room knows. The point in saying that is with Jackie Robinson, there was a test case for him outside of the U.S. before he went to Brooklyn in 1947. Does anybody know where he actually played before in the minor leagues? Montreal. Montreal. So, and they had said that if, and I'll play this, it's about 3 minutes long. And this is something that I do in my US course as well. They had said that if, they being Branch Rickey, who was the owner of the Dodgers, as well as those who were trying to push integration, they had said that if this would work in Montreal, then maybe it would work in the US. Again, so often, and when I was in AP US history in school, and I tell my students this as well, we look at US history in a vacuum so often. We don't even look at it in comparison with our neighbor right next door, 500 feet that way, as I like to often say in class. So this is one where, this is a news report from the late 80s on CBC Montreal talking about the year before Jackie Robinson would make news in the US in 1947, integrating the major leagues. So I'll just play that for you and get a reaction on the other side. And yes, we have that to deal with. And I'll talk while this is on. So this is just an example of those interdependencies that I try to play to in my classes when we're talking about U.S. history. Because I also do Canadian history, I use that, but I speak Spanish too, so I'll do even Mexican history as well. But I don't know how much of this, and I know obviously with AP there's a very, like you were saying, Kai, there is such a
We're limited.
yeah, exactly. And it hasn't changed apparently, even from when I was a student. You know, we had a very clear curriculum. Here's what you got to do.
Oh, no, it has changed because now we are asked to do more.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me either, so it makes it even more restrictive to the point. So here we go.
Baseball was a white man's game for a century. The very first game of organized baseball was played in Hoboken, New Jersey in 1846. For exactly 100 years, all the players in the major leagues and the many minor leagues were white. A few light-skinned Negroes did manage to pass as Cubans or Mexicans, but baseball was officially closed to blacks. They had to form their own leagues, playing in broken-down ballparks for very little money. But that changed forever on April 18, 1946. Jackie Robinson and the Montreal Royals of the International League began the season and a new era in Jersey City, New Jersey. And the guinea pig turned out to be a lion. In a fantastic performance, Robinson hit a 3-run homer, went 4 for 5 at the plate, scored 4 runs, drove in 4 others, and stole 2 bases. For a man under so much pressure, representing an entire race of people, it was an incredible debut. Years later, in 1962, the day he became the first black player elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame, Robinson explained why he accepted such an enormous challenge.
I hope that it serves a purpose because there are a number of us who look back at our careers and we can become discouraged, and I think it may inspire many of our people to recognize that a little extra hard work, a little effort, perhaps they too can be rewarded. I don't think they'll ever be as happy and thrilled about anything as I am at this moment, but hard work and determination will eliminate a lot of the ills that we face.
Back in 1946, Montrealers had caught baseball fever. They hadn't yet seen the team which was making history. They eagerly sought tickets for the Royals' home opener. After that first incredible game in Jersey City and 2 weeks on the road in the U.S., Jackie Robinson and the Royals finally were home. They had over 16,000 people at Delormier Stadium that day, the largest opening day crowd ever. Mayor Camille Hood threw out the first ball, and Jackie Robinson went on to have a magnificent season. He batted .349, stole 40 bases, and was an outstanding second baseman. The fans in Montreal loved him, but not in most of the U.S. cities. The old prejudices were very strong, and Robinson had many rough times. But all that abuse, the threats, the hard times for Jackie took place on the road, not here. This is where the old ballpark was, Delormier Stadium. It's been gone for a long time now, replaced by an athletic field and a school. But this was home for Jackie and the Royals. They loved it here. And he led the Royals to the championship of the minor leagues. They won the Little World Series, defeating the Louisville Colonels in a terrific struggle. After the Royals won the final game of the Little World Series here at Delormier Stadium, Robinson was almost torn apart by the adoring fans. When he left the ballpark, through a doorway in the park just about here, there were thousands out on the street, and he literally had to run for his life down along Ontario Street to get away from them. But as Sam Moulton of the Gazette wrote, it may be a lesson of goodwill among men, the chasing of a Negro by white men not because of hate, but because of love. Jackie Robinson died in 1972, and he hasn't lived in Montreal since 1946. But Montrealers can always take pride in having supported to the fullest a real hero of our times as he made history. For Newswatch, I'm Bob McDevitt.
Okay, so that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. This is history that we don't often hear and is very, very germane to U.S. history. And again, with us being on the border, I do a lot of links between Canadian and American history in order to better understand that U.S. history that I'm teaching. And again, with the sensibility of Spanish as well, I try to do that, especially with the whole immigration piece that we're talking about today, linking the present to the past. History, and I'm from that school, and Eric and I have talked about this, history needs to be relevant to our young people, to our young adults. If it's not, in most cases, it's going to not interest them. It's just a gen ed that we're doing here unless you're doing a minor. But it is something that has to be relevant, has to be germane to. And I would imagine that when you're doing AP, you're probably doing the same thing, at least trying to tie it into something that they can relate to in the present.
Well, it's also a requirement now.
Let's see, that's good. And that probably has the people that say history for history's sake. That's awesome. Because, well, from my point of view as a professional historian, that is really the way to go, because I don't know how much that divide is there between history for history's sake versus history and making it relevant to the present. So it's good to know, at least from my point of view professionally, that that's actually a requirement. Is that new content?
It's the redesign of the redesign.
The redesign.
And it's called synthesis.
Yep.
And in order to get a synthesis, they have to make connections, similar in kind but different in time, is what I call it. And they have to make a connection. And I use a lot of modern times because if I'm teaching colonial times, well, they haven't learned anything about World War I and World War II yet, so I can't really use that. So I'll use modern times to make those connections. And also within the synthesis, they could, because we have to teach in terms of beings, so they can tie into a different being. Or a different geographical area, or a whole different way of looking at it. Maybe, well, they have to look at it not just in terms of like what this prompt is asking and what the context is here, but expand the context. So.
Very nice. So that's
and then that way they can think critically about it.
And that's hugely important. And I don't know how much you tie, and this would apply for everyone here, how much you tie your own local histories in your area to the broader U.S. history. Because obviously here in the Valley, it's such a different tale than it would be in Lewiston, even though in both places on the surface, people have historically spoken French. It's totally different. Webster Ashburton versus,
I was talking to you about the textile mills in Lewiston.
Yes.
When I start talking about the market revolution, I bring up how Maine was crucial to the market revolution.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we talk about prohibition, I talk about rum running right across the river.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So-
Matzi my dad.
That's,
In
that's
Cincinnati,
how they
yeah.
make the connections, because you're right, because they're kids and they're like, why do I need to say this?
That's it. And, and I'm just making this connection again. The reason why I don't do notes is because I get to make connections off the top of my head. Here's one about the French piece that I would throw out there. In the Valley, clearly, the country came to the people who were here. We know that, St. David in 1785, or 1842. 6 decades almost of speaking French before English was even thought of in this place until John Baker and, But Lewiston, French is spoken. Grand Trunk Railway, so, and I bring this into the U.S. piece. And I lived in Old Town. Old Town is a mix of all of that because the first migration to Old Town was basically from up here, so it was an internal migration. That's why you have Sives and Pelletiers and this kind of thing in Old Town. But then you had an Acadian migration, a different one, from PEI and southeastern New Brunswick. That's where you get the Chasson. So again, it's so fascinating to even look right within the same state, the richness of the history, and that opens up to a broader trend, clearly, of migration, both internal in the case of the Valley to other places like Old Town, and Lewiston in the 1920s, as we know, to work in the mills there, as well as international migration. Obviously, potato famine with the Irish, 1830s, 1840s, etc., to the U.S. So that's why I was wondering if you kind of link it. You're in Southern Aroostook. Do you link any of the local history down there, Shannon?
No, not really.
Okay. So just a way to create those interdependencies and connections and relevancy for our students. So that's what I try to do, at this level. And it sounds like you all are very largely doing that too. So, when are we? How long do we go?
11:20.
11:20. Okay, so we got plenty of time. Perfect. Okay, so let me see. So are there any questions that you all would have for us as well? Yeah.
Of course I do, because I can't shut up. But,
It's so good.
It's nice to have people sitting in these chairs who want to be down here.
Absolutely.
As opposed to being up there saying questions and like,
That's it.
well, I had a question for both of you, because you have
stand up again.
different ways of asking questions in your final exam.
Sure.
And I wrote it down here so I wouldn't forget, like, natal hack?
Yes.
Natal hack? You must come across writing issues, because you're looking for that critical thinking piece. And even I think we could all agree that even in that group of students that are the top students or do AP, I still have to teach how to write a thesis statement.
Yep.
So what do you do? How do you tackle that?
I've, again, adapted over the years. I can't talk without leaning. Like, I don't know
Yeah, I'm
why.
the same way.
I'm not trying to
Yeah.
push up with it. I
It's all
can't
good.
think unless I'm like leaning on it. What I've started to do is, I start them off writing from really day one in the class. And a lot of the students, and I don't know about the dual enrollment, they come into World Civ and they're either just taking English comp or they haven't even taken comp classes yet. So I start them off writing, and I've learned they have to hand in multiple drafts of their writing assignment, unless it's a discussion board post. And they hand them all in together. And I require at least 2 of the first draft. They have to print it out, and then they have to show me their handwritten edits so that I see that they have edited a paper. I don't grade very hard on the first assignments, and I encourage them to meet with me individually. It's very labor intensive, as I'm sure you all know, working with a student on writing issues. And I will go through those assignments literally line by line, often with them. Some of them don't take me up on that and they're not interested. They get, they get a 70, like, cool, that. But So they have to do two draft, one draft and then a final version. We have a writing lab. They get extra credit, a couple of extra points if they go to the writing lab to work through a paper or an assignment. And then the writing lab sends me, email notification that so-and-so was here, we spent 45 minutes, this is what we did. And I give them examples of my own writing. When I give an assignment, I always say to them, okay, this is the assignment. If I were answering the assignment, it would take me, because they say, how many words does it have to be?
I hate that.
And I said, well, until you've answered the question, but if I were doing it, I couldn't do it in less than. You can do less if you think, but if it were me. And then after an assignment has been handed in and graded, I write, post on Blackboard, and if it's an in-class, or an on-site class, I'll spend the first, 15 minutes talking about what I was looking for in the assignment. But it is a constant, work in progress with writing skills. And it's a question, or discussion that I think we have at UMFK a lot is, do we let them take the history class before they've taken the writing class? Because history traditionally is heavy on reading and reading comprehension. And it's, at least my classes, and I think Paul's, are heavy on writing. And I'm grading harder at the end of the semester than at the beginning. And I find certainly a lot of my students don't have that kind of experience, and they're a little intimidated in the beginning. When the first assignment, and I say, I'll walk you through it. My goal is not to give bad grades. My goal is not to fail you. My goal is to teach you how to do this. And if I'm failing at that, or if I'm not doing that, then I'm not doing my job, or I'm not doing it well. I mean, obviously you lose some students, you can't get everyone up to an A. But my job is to take you from where you are and get you as close to where, I'd say I would like you to be, because that sounds a little offensive, but to be able to think and articulate and write and to express your ideas and to feel confident. Not just that you can do it, but that what you have to say as a student is interesting. Yes, I'm the teacher, but I want to know what you're thinking. And it matters to me what you're doing with this material, what your ideas are, and that your ideas are valuable. We may disagree, but that's okay, and so it's a whole package of getting them confident, getting them the resources, perhaps out of class, because I'm not, this is not a comp class, and I can't spend all my time teaching them, good grammar and how to put, a sentence together. But at the same time, writing is a part of history, and so and I'm sure you find too, it depends on the class you get. You sort of never know prior to, you're winging it the first week, getting a feel for the kids, where they are, who they are, what types of teaching they're going to respond to. So my end goals tend to be the same, or my standards are the same. But we do a lot of adapting, sometimes literally like mid-sentence, I see they're glazing over, clearly whatever I'm doing right now, this very minute is not working, and you sort of switch in the middle of your sentence to get them back, because the dynamics between the students, or between the students and the teacher, tend to be different. I did something different this semester with this final exam, the first one that you see. With the 3 questions. And I gave them the first question in advance. They couldn't bring their notes in, but I thought it was a very sort of broad question. They only have 2 hours for their final exams here, and to get hit with a question like that, with no advance warning, I thought, well, that was a little unfair. It is a really intense question, and I want them to be following something that we've looked at all semester. So we talked about it on the last day of class, this is the question, and I walked them through some sort of sample answers that they then couldn't use on the exam, but how to do something like this. And like Paul, I don't grade the writing on the exams, if it's an in-class exam, with the same sort of strictness or toughness that I do if it's an assignment they've been working on at home, or if I've given a take-home exam. You know, because obviously, I mean, how many of us can write, you know, as well as we could, you know, if we had multiple drafts, you know, on an exam. So again, every semester for me is a little different. You know, I don't get the same exam every semester. Sometimes I'll rework the question. Are you waving at me to be
No,
then I get talking and, you know.
No, I'm not waving my chair, I'm just getting ready to get my stuff ready for you.
Oh, okay. Okay, so that's kind of how I approach the writing and the quality of writing. And you know, you get students who are absolutely, you know, beautiful writers, and then you get kids who are, you know, and so I try and really start with where they are, and they're not all going to end up in the same place, but as long as they are progressing, you know, that. And the more they meet with me, you know, I don't necessarily give extra credit, you know, if they'll come and meet with me with an assignment, but I say, you know, at the end of the semester, if you're B plus, you know, it's one of those that could go either way, but you've consistently met with me to improve, you know, it's subjective, that will bump the grade up to a B plus, whereas if you've blown me off all semester, I'm a crabbier grader, and I'll say, okay, I'm going to leave it exactly where it is, and that, you know, 0.2 difference that would move it up. Well,
You should see within the next few years, as we are incorporating habits of work with our standards base, that you're going to see the kids are going to get used to knowing that if they work hard, it gets bumped up a little. If they don't, it's going to stay where it is.
and that
we have to incorporate that within our standards.
And that's good, and because, you know, sometimes left to their own devices, they'll say, well, I've got a C, you know, that's okay with me. You know, whereas, okay, you get a C, but you come, you meet with me for 20 minutes after class, you know, and you learn more. You know, you can do more if you can meet with them individually. On the other hand, some semesters when, you know, you have 90 students, it's
Yeah,
it can be really hard, yeah.
problematic.
It does depend. Sometimes I have online classes, I'll have 45 students in them, and I can't, you can't do it.
And it becomes more problematic to give so much detailed feedback that you want to.
I'm sure you run into that too.
You still give it, and you give it to the best of your ability, as much as humanly possible. But again, humanly is the adverb. There's only so much that we as individuals can do once you do have a large number, but we do the best that we can in giving that feedback. And that's one thing we pride ourselves on here, of course, is being very student-centered.
So what are your expectations as far as what you would like us to see, the time period? I think we're going to do U.S. History 2 at SACS. What time period do you cover? Are we going to use Blackboard? Do you want us to use Blackboard?
You certainly can. I mean, I teach online and face-to-face like Erica does as well. And my online tends to be actually compressed. It's either 6 weeks like this summer, so it's half the time, double the material. Oh, well, the same amount of material is in a semester, but in half the time. Or 8 weeks, which is about 2/3 of the time for the same amount of material. So yes, Blackboard, short answer, yes, Blackboard would be great. That's the platform that we use here at UNFK, although most of us supplement either with Google Drive. You know, we supplement the basic platform. But the other piece too is time period, periodization. I'm thinking French, periodization. The period, I don't even know how you'd say that in English, but the time periods that are covered. The way I do it in USNI, it's so difficult because I would like to spend more time with Native peoples on what is now U.S. territory. It's very different than when I was in school and taking AP US, and look at our 3 AP. Do you teach AP as well? Okay. In that it started with the first European and African contact. It was pretty much so 1600s. But I start 10,000, even 12,000 years ago. But that's only one chapter. So I have to rely a lot on anthropological evidence, obviously. But even in the book that we use,
Paul,
out of many.
we start 10,000 years ago too.
Awesome.
We do,
And
that's
changed.
period one. We start with the Stone Age.
Awesome. Okay,
Yeah,
so
see? You start way.
perfect. And like I said, that was when I was in school. I am 47. I'll be 48 next month. So that was 30 years ago. So a lot's changed, but, and I'm just trying and put my own self in, as how it was when I was a student, just as a reference. So yeah, chapter 1, the content of villages to 1500 is what it says. And it starts with the Cahokia settlement in the Mississippi Valley, just east of St. Louis. And that's kind of what they call the American communities piece, very much that social history from especially the 60s, 70s, when it was very big, trying to make it more quantitative, more so than qualitative. I'm the generation after. If statistics had been required when I was becoming a historian, I probably wouldn't be a historian, honestly, because I'm not that good with numbers. But the point is 10, 12,000 years ago, up to, I say in my class, and the reason why I'm kind of looking away is I'm thinking 1865 is usually what I do, the end of the Civil War. But sometimes if people want to go into Reconstruction, I'll let them in the first half of the course, as long as they can tie it into something directly with Civil War. Obviously it's tied in, you know that, but I mean to actually make an explicit link, whatever they're studying in Reconstruction is tied to this event pre-1865, this theme. And Kyle, you mentioned thematics before, and that's of course the way we're teaching history these days, more so than chronology, it's more thematics than anything. Chronology is still important, but thematics is more important these days. So if they can tie it to some theme before 1865, then that works. For the second half of the course, HTY 103, basically 1865 to the present. I should put an asterisk next to the present, though. We never get to the present, but we do make it to, I make it a point to, we almost made it to Vietnam this year. Almost. And that would have been the first time in the 8 years I've been in MFK that we would have made it. Again, thematically, though, we do make it to that time period already. Civil rights is one chapter. We always make the civil rights, absolutely. It's usually the last chapter we get to. And then the other piece is, we have something called American Mid-Century. It's 1952 to 1963 in the book. So I always cover the broader cultural piece and also the civil rights piece. So usually 50s, 60s. Yeah, so.
Can I say something?
Yeah, no, go.
Well, I never done.
Of course you can.
But I think the nice thing about doing the college classes as opposed to the AP where you're much more kind of locked into what you have to cover, is we have a lot more freedom in college classes. So if you're doing the dual enrollment, or I don't even know quite, I'm calling it dual enrollment, rural what the early college, if you don't finish something, you don't finish something. I mean, I always have my end goal, but I'm doing the whole world, so I never get as far as that. But if the class gets absolutely interested in a particular place, I'll stop, because they're interested in it, they're engaged, they're doing history, they're thinking, they're doing all the things I want them to be able to do. And I say to them, I'm happy to be sidetracked as long as it's history and it's important. And we're asking questions. If we don't get through World War II, we don't get through World War II. I think it's just as important to see them get excited and engaged and following.
We need professors like you to talk to the college board, because there are so many times when I can see the kids are so engaged and I want to continue on.
And you're
but
locked in.
We got to get to Watergate.
And that I think at least if you're doing these classes, you have that freedom. And again, I always say on my various syllabi, this is what officially we're covering. We don't do it. We don't do it. And I want to say I don't care, but I sort of don't care as long as they're learning and they're thinking and they're excited. And I'm assuming for all of us, since we're all doing history or government, we're doing it because we're passionate about it. I mean, I think history is the greatest thing, since sliced bread, and I don't understand why everyone in the world is not a history teacher. But, if we can just bring some of that in there and do these, things with our students.
Do you do projects too, as far as, with our standards base, we've really moved a lot from the tests. We got rid of midterms and finals. Our principal doesn't want us doing that anymore. And so we do project-based, like we have things like Project Citizen, where they choose a social justice, environmental, whatever it might be of their interest, and they try to follow through with that project. Louisiana Purchase, Lewis and Clark, project-based things. So do we have freedom to do that with our students, or would you rather, I mean, I have them write too, and I have them write essays and, do like the things, the questions on tests that you have up there. But is it okay to do that as well?
You certainly may, from my point of view, you certainly may. I would just ask, like, in the US piece, that you do the exams all the same because it is a college class, but the project-based learning, I know it's huge. That's actually part of the multicultural curriculum design class I teach here. We have a whole chapter in one of our textbooks on diversity and differentiation on project-based learning. And obviously it's a differentiation because if it's project-based, very often you can appeal to your kinesthetic learners. Talking about art, obviously, but you appeal to your kinesthetic learners a little bit. So the short answer is yes, but the only thing I'd ask is that the exam still.
Not a place of,
But definitely as, if you wanted to do it as a kind of formative assessment or, even an informal formative assessment, go for it. I mean, yeah. But summative pieces, I would just
And
ask.
will you provide those for us? Do you want us to write up our own summative?
I have some things I can share with you, certainly. I mean, I'm happy to actually put up one of my exams. I can send you any of the exams that you'd like to have.
Okay.
And that goes for anyone else in the room if you'd like. That's up to you. Yes.
I'm so sorry, but this
No,
begs
no,
the question.
this is
I have
excellent.
a very good point. Okay, with standards based on PBE, we are assessing differently. It's not really summative assessment, it's more formative assessment. It's learning targets, and you hit that learning target. How are we going to marry the requirements of dual enrollment with our requirements for PBE?
Right, and that's the thing, that obviously with the formative piece, I mean, you can throw that in. You can adjust the grade, the grading scheme as well if you wish. I'll leave that up to all of you. But yes, I do understand it's much more formative. And it's a sea change, as we know. But the summative piece, I would still ask that it be there because when they get to college, they are going to have to. They're still going to see it. The summative assessment. And I know that you have certain constraints. I remember, and it's gotten even tighter since the 10 years that I was in it.
Well, it just seems like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing in terms of secondary education and higher education.
Right. And it is difficult because, again, for those of us like myself who have taught secondary, especially secondary, because elementary as well, we have a few elementary teachers, especially teaching education programs. But for me, who's taught secondary and then seeing the changes that are happening, it is definitely problematic, and it sounds like sounds a little bit like a cliche, but it truly is a work in progress. It's not. I think the most important thing is to continue to communicate and try to find a way to bridge those gaps. Like I said, that the summative assessments at the college level, I can't see them going away anytime soon. But the formative piece, I'm aware of them just because I teach in education too, and so if you can put that in, just use as many of your formative assessments and then try to throw in, throw in the summative as well, that what we have here.
Well, there's always going to be a summative assessment of some sort, but we're just, the finals and midterms we still have them, but I think that has to do with the community not really buying in yet.
Oh, yeah.
But in actuality, in terms of true PBE, you shouldn't have them.
Right, yes, I know theoretically that's true, yeah.
And our projects are summative too.
Yeah.
It's like we have all the formative all the way through the unit, and then, okay, you're going to show me what you've learned. And our projects are summative, but I certainly am fine with tests and stuff too. And some kids enjoy our written
Absolutely,
tests.
and that in itself is a differentiation. You said it, Shannon, that the traditional way, even though we're moving away from that with proficiency-based education, PBE, we're clearly moving away from it. Still, it's almost to the point where the traditional piece of writing an exam is actually a differentiation in itself, because it is being dispensed with in some places. Like I said, you guys still have them, right? The exams, yeah. So, and again, that's that practical piece with the community. I wasn't educated that way. What am I kidding?
Exactly, But and we were just talking out, like, after the AP exam itself, I don't give them another big summative exam because they already have it. So I give them a final project.
Yeah.
Like this year, it's create your own crash course video. So they have to choose a different era, and then they have to create a crash course video.
And you know what expression came to my mind? I mean, those of you who don't speak French, it's kind of like burnt out, but fini brûlé bad. I mean,
Oui,
after the,
fini
yeah, but
brûlé
fini
bad.
brûlé bad, I mean, it's
Burnt out.
boom, yeah, after the,
Yeah,
after
yeah.
the AP exam, absolutely, so, yeah. Good point.
Now, the
Thank you.
dual enrollment classes, do they get grades, like, or do they get, so they're still following like the college grading schedule, like, do you follow our
Right now, it's
grading?
grades,
Okay,
but by 2020 or 2021,
Maybe not.
it's gonna be all numbers.
even for our college
Yes.
classes.
One through
This
four.
This is why I'm saying it's
Okay,
not
now-
married yet, and there's a lot
Does
of
Scott
talking
know
going on.
that? Scott, was he know that?
He must.
Because that's where, because, you know, I know UMPI has switched
Oh,
over
yeah,
to that, but
they've
we're
been
not.
PB for a
But
while.
it's the law unless things
And
change.
even if it's a they're taking a college class.
Even if it's a college course, because it's gonna be standards-based diplomas by 2021. By 2020, it's math and ELA.
Yep.
21, it's social studies, math, and ELA, and science, and then it's
Okay.
everything else by 22. So it's
Unless
all
they
gonna be
change
1,
their
2, 3,
minds
4,
before then, right?
Unless they
Switch-
change their
minds
switch
before.
back.
Which we know has happened, promising futures, main learning results, and everything
Right,
else.
right, okay, so I didn't really, yeah, so
So
that,
what
that
would-
is something that the powers that be are gonna have to
They're
work
gonna have to
out.
work that out.
How,
There's a lot of stuff that needs to be
yeah,
dealt with before,
yeah, yeah, no, I didn't realize that was gonna affect,
and we can't convert it. I mean, people have tried to convert it, there's no
affect how to
effect.
grade the college classes, yeah.
With my AP American Government class, I've got 3 years until I have to do that.
You have to do it in 3 years.
Because I teach seniors in AP American
Next year, we're
Government,
switching
so-
over our freshmen,
Just-
so when
Yes.
these freshmen become juniors, then I'll be at that point where I have to do
We got
that.
2 years before
Exactly.
it's gonna stop happening.
So yeah, so I have 2 years too, because our freshmen, our eighth graders right now are full PPE and.
Because
Yeah,
then
so
the
you're at 2
kids
years.
who are taking the actual UMFK classes, you know, who don't have the, you know, the class offered at their high school, you know, that we get in our classes, they're just gonna get regular grades.
And they're not, and by that time, like, you know, your
Because I'm grading
kindergartners
them
and
as
your
if
first
they're
graders right
UMFK
now,
students.
they're not gonna know what a Carnegie grade is, and they're not gonna
So
understand.
We'll have to have a scale that transfers it back over.
Right, if I give them
And it's
a,
not exact, like you
if-
said.
and we can't give number grade, like we have to give, you know, I mean, I figure number grades and then I have to translate them into a letter grade in order to post them, but if I give a kid a B, I have no idea what that would be for,
I've got-
you know, for,
I've got a
A
question.
3 maybe, I mean,
I don't know,
I mean,
I have B,
but
I
that's
know
so
what
wide,
B
you
is.
know, 1
Hey,
through
but
4,
it has,
obviously.
you have to, it has
That's
been
something that-
mastered, all the standards involved.
Mhm.
right, because, yeah, so that's something that,
I'm glad I'm
again,
not a policymaker, that's.
no, it is something that is good that, I'm assuming Scott was in is ahead or on that because it's
Even the
going to
fact
be a
that
big
he's
issue.
the head of the tri-district strategic planning, he
Right.
must know all about it.
Right, but that is something.
Oh, he does,
that-
definitely,
yeah,
he and I've
yeah.
talked about it. So, he definitely is.
Did I cut you
I
off?
yeah, I have a
or
question
something?
for you. You know, this is my first year doing this, probably with all of us sitting here. I teach a year-long class with AP American Government. Some of these young ladies in here have basically given their grades already for the first semester. Because they're giving 3 college credits. Mine's a full year, worth 3 college credits. How do you want me to go about giving you this particular grade or giving the school the grade? Is that up to you guys, that you guys choose, or is that something Scott chooses? You know, first semester, a kid gets an A in my American Government class. Second semester, he gets a B. Do you want me to average the particular grades together, or do you know the
It's
answer to
just
that
like-
question?
Yeah,
It's just
Jennifer
one-
takes care of all
She
I
that.
was gonna say, that's,
Yeah,
that's.
she'll
Because I didn't know if you guys did that.
She'll email
Okay.
you, she usually CCs your guidance department, says, okay, your grades are due, like right now they're due June 16th.
And I know that I got that. I
And
just
we
know
give
it.
our grades to the guidance department, they give it to Jennifer, and she deals with it.
Do I give her grade first semester and second semester, or just a grade as a general whole? That's what I'm wondering.
Give her first and second,
Okay,
yeah.
I just didn't know, it was my first time.
I know.
They're on trimesters.
Mhm.
Right,
She'll
yeah,
still
the
take
high
care of
school
all
years.
that. It's not even a- it's not even a headache,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, Fort Kenyon is, I haven't been here with in 10 years, but I saw friends that watched that. I'm not sure if their semesters are not, I think across it out. Kai would know, that's what's.
It's,
Kai,
Oh,
is it,
sorry.
that's okay, are they by, are the grades given by semesters and then Wasco, they are, right?
Right now, yeah, we're by semester.
That's what I thought.
We
I
have,
think
we have
my high school
trimesters at the
year, that's what I was
elementary
like-
school, but we
Yeah,
have
I-
semesters at the middle high school.
Yeah, actually, I do at the elementary was trimesters, but.
So you guys are getting, with over 100 schools for rural U, you're getting a whole bunch of different ways of grading across the
we must be, I mean,
Yeah,
Paul and I
absolutely.
don't see them.
No,
obviously.
That's why you're getting a different level of kid. That's why
Right,
you may be getting these top-notch kids that you're totally expecting to be in college, but then you're also
And
getting
then
these
we're
other
also
kids that
getting-
can't even write.
Right.
Yeah.
They have different-
You know, depending on the school they come from, do they come from a Class A school, which is what I teach at, or, I don't even know, the other, Class D school?
Where you have more
Right.
options, more electives, more
Yeah.
opportunities for these kids to write more.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
You know, I'm doing DBQs, I'm doing group class.
Oh,
I'm having
DVDs, I'm starting to sweat just.
I'm having them do their own
I
elections.
remember
Which is
so-
great,
You know.
which is just great,
Um,
should I?
But I just
Come out of
wanted
my mouth
to talk about the last page of my syllabus that I'm happy to share with everyone, and it should be available to you anyway if you haven't already seen it, through Scott and Janet. I make this point all the time, that history is always revisionist. A lot of us see revisionism as a dirty word, but history is revisionist. Why? Because history is not the past itself. I have to tell my students that from day one. It's not the past itself. The past doesn't change. What happened in the past doesn't. The way that we empirically investigate it does change depending on the sources we're, frankly, depending on our own biases that we try to get rid of, or some people write them in and say, this is how I feel about it, just, you know, and so there's a big debate about that, of course, too. But each time you write history, even if the words stay the same and it's simply a reprint of the book, the social context, and speaking of context, you know, as we talk about contextualizing, the social, political, linguistic context into which that book is entering is going to change. Therefore, the history itself is going to change because of the way it's interacting with this context. So everything we do historically is revisionist. Even if, like I said, now the word changes, just the nature of society is going to shift. So I tried to dispel that notion that history, this whole idea of revisionism in history is a dirty word. Well, no, everything in history is revisionist by definition, I mean, per se. But again, the past itself, no, that doesn't change. The way we get investigated and write it does change.
Well, it's the word for that in historiography,
Historiography, yeah, and the historiography.
which is what I tell my kids.
Yep, the historiography, absolutely. And I talk about it's the linguistic hat that I put on. When we do historiography, I just talk about the roots. History, obviously, is historio, history. Graphy from graphing in the Greek for to write. So exactly, yeah, I always go through, I think I've had historiography. Yes, some, I don't think I should. But anyway.
And well, you must get that from your kids all the time. Like, well, how can they allow that to happen? I'm like, well, you're talking about 2017 sensibilities and not 1877 sensibilities.
That's it. And that's why it's so hard, and I think for any of us in any kind of human group that has experienced depression, and every human group has in some way, shape, or form. When we talk about things or themes again, that touch us as human beings. For example, when I talk about civil rights, I have to be really careful that, say, Paul the person steps back from Paul the historian as much as I can humanly do it. Because I have my own cultural, and I'm going to say the word baggage. I have my cultural baggage, you know, etc. So someone that's talking about the Acadian deportation, that's another one. And especially here where most folks were not descended from people who were deported. Guidance Bay always says that, but that's not the case. That they were mostly hidden in the woods and they went to Quebec, you know, in this area, in the valley, right? So, you know, folks talking about Acadian history in general and Acadian deportation up here, it must be somewhat similar. It's not exactly the same as no human experience is, but somewhat similar to how I must feel about civil rights and, you know, and lynchings, this kind of thing, when people were deported and literally died in the hulls of boats, you know, from being crowded and from suffocating, you know, during the deportation. I mean, that's traumatic history. So, but it's still hard for us as people to kind of pull ourselves back from it, you know. And I find that it's just very interesting to talk about objective, subjective, and those are loaded terms, obviously. But to be comfortable with uncomfortability, I guess is what I'd like to say. And that's sometimes hard for us, even as adults, you know, all of us here. It's hard for us, let alone for people who are just becoming young adults. So, yet, my students so often have such. They surprise me in the best way every semester because I learn so much from them, just their point of view on things and their own life experiences. And I'm not just talking about meat and potatoes, things like technology today, but just even if they don't have as much life experience as all of us, sometimes that lends to a very different view because, let's just say they're maybe not jaded like some older adults are. Yet you have some younger people who are 18 going on 38 that have been through a lot in their life, and they actually bring that to the table and I learn things from them too. So it's so fascinating. I find teaching, and if we do it right, it's always a two-way street. It's always a give and take with our students. It's easy to say that, but if you really listen to them, you can, I've learned so much just from them. Not even necessarily content, even content knowledge, like some particular pieces of, let's say, local history. It's like, oh yeah, well my nanny did this, and you know, and she used to talk to this person. You know, you learn stuff that way. And that's content, that's rich local history, so you're actually learning content. But even just about how to learn history, you learn a lot from your students as well, right? So.
There's one sort of last thing I guess I'd like to say, and it's one of the things that I start out my semesters with, is talking to students about how they've been taught history in the past and what they have been taught about. I usually use American history, but we also find here I have a lot of international students.
Mm-hmm.
But how are you taught history when you're a kid? What does your society think you need to know, and why do they think you need to know it? Because then I go on to teach them a lot of things they've never heard about before. And they're very angry that they weren't taught some of the things that I go on to teach them about, what's happened historically. And I say there's been sort of a tradition of, and I don't like to use the word indoctrination of young people, but when you're taught, in 5th grade, you do civics and Pledge of Allegiance and pilgrims, and you're taught from a particular historical perspective that the country kind of wants you to start thinking about its history. And every country does this. You're sort of socialized in school to think about your country's history in a particular way, usually in a positive light. And especially today with, values, and school boards deciding, do we teach creationism, do we teach this? I mean, things are taught often for a reason. And so I say to them, start asking some questions about what you've grown up thinking. And sometimes we just start with Pledge of Allegiance. I say, I know, schools still say the Pledge of Allegiance, which is fine. But I say, how many of you know who wrote it, why it was written, and why we now say under God, which was a very late addition to the Pledge of Allegiance, from 1958, right?
Oh gosh!
But it was because of the Cold War.
It was.
That we didn't used to say under God
Yeah,
in Pledge of Allegiance. But they don't know that. They've been saying it since they were 5 years old. And I said, no, it's because we're trying to distinguish ourselves, differentiate ourselves from the godless communists. So we threw that in there. And we brought God right into the schools where he wasn't supposed to actually be, because of this context that Paul teaches about with the Cold War. And so and I love standing up here and watching little light bulbs go off, around your students, and like, oh, I didn't know that. Why didn't I know that? Why didn't anyone tell me that? Or when we talk about slavery, and I talk about, the slave trade that's going on, in this country now. And I do a lot with World War II, because I do all the upper level history classes. So I teach a class on genocide, I teach a class on World War II and the Holocaust, and I talk about the United States refusal, changing immigration policy and refusal to let in Jewish refugees during the Holocaust. A very deliberate anti-Semitic policy in the 20s and the 30s and into the 40s. And the kids say, well, we thought we fought World War II to liberate the concentration camps, And then there's and I don't say I like making my students angry, but you like that, I do, when they start to have a reaction and say, well, wait a minute. Why don't I know that? Why did we do that? And then they start saying, what's going on now? And they start making those connections. And I'm much more political than Paul.
Yeah,
but that's one of those things in college classes you can do. And I say, I don't care if you are on the opposite, I make it clear to them, I do not care if you are completely in the opposite political spectrum from me. You will not get graded for that, you will not get judged for that. But I will bring connections in, regardless of where anyone is, and we will have a civil conversation, and again, there's no judgment, it doesn't affect your grade, I don't care if you disagree with me, but you can do that, In high school you can't.
No, that's right.
But in the college classes, you absolutely can bring these things
Do
in,
you,
and I do.
Do you use the book by Smith Powers, Problem from Hell?
No, I don't. I don't, is that, okay.
I love that book.
Say
She
it
used to be
again?
a UN ambassador, it's
Right,
called
yeah.
Father from Hell, and she wrote about all the genocides that have been occurring
Yeah.
in the 20th century.
Mhm.
It's a pretty powerful book.
And the title again is? I'm
A
sorry.
Problem from Hell.
A Problem
Yeah.
from Hell, thank you. I just wanted to throw in a couple of things. I was looking for markers. I got a new bag and I
I
have.
gotta ask, I will, okay, you've got one.
No, where's teleology? Teleology is what Erica's talking about, purpose in history, and how purposes sometimes are hidden, sometimes they're obvious. And this is from the Greek teleos, which means purposeology, of course, the study of. So, and I actually get this from a mentor of mine actually in Quebec, Jocelyn Destourneau, who teaches history at Université Laval in Quebec City. He talks about that teleology all the time in French. And talks about how teleology needs to be outed, if you will, in history so that we can see where people's tendencies lie as historiographers, to use historiography. So I'm always careful about that, and when you mentioned Eric, of course my antenna went up, I said, oh yes, that teleology, or theology in English, teleology, I'm sorry. So, from the Greek. So that is always a study of how history is written, and again, talk about objectivity, subjectivity, it's so fascinating too. I mean, Monsieur Destourneau has basically made part of his career on the study of teleology in Quebec history, actually. So, and I was fortunate enough to be with him for a year in 2006 in Quebec City, and so I learned a lot of this, and it's so fascinating because it opened my eyes, and just what Erica mentioned, I felt like we needed to kind of expound upon it even more. And then the other piece too is fascinating, talking about the embargo, very much the limit on Jewish immigration to not just the US but Canada too. It's so interesting, and my Canadian friends, both English, French, and speak other languages as well in Canada, will be upset at me for this. But Canada had an even more restrictive policy.
Canada was much.
None is too many was the word that was used by one diplomat when asked how many Jewish immigrants should come to Canada, and they knew what was going on. None is too many. Yet, it's interesting because, and Canada, rightfully so, with the blue hats and everything, as peacekeepers during the UN, Lester B. Pearson, Peace Prize, Suez Canal Crisis, 1956, yes, that's very important. But there's also that other side that we don't know. Irving Abella wrote a book on that, actually. It's called None is Too Many, about the lack of Jewish immigration to Canada during World War II. And of course, Canada, because it was a dominion at that time, was in with Great Britain the week after Great Britain declared war. So that then, I believe, don't quote me, I think September 8, 1939, when Canada declared. So they were in, obviously, 2 years and a few months before the US was. So it's fascinating when we think about this, like you said, unearthing these things, these assumptions, difference between collective memory and history. That's it right there, which you're just talking about, Erica, too. Difference between collective memory, which is not, sometimes it is history, but sometimes it's not. In this case, it's incorrect history.
But we get to do all these good things, and you can do them in the college class, the dual enrollment
Absolutely.
classes.
Yep.
You have that freedom. My guess is you're limited a little bit because you're still in the high school, so you probably can't bring the political stuff
Well,
into it.
in a way, I don't whitewash our history.
Yeah,
And
but-
I've had a kid tell me before at the end of the school year, she said, taking this class has made me ashamed to be a white person. And I'm like, well, then I did something right.
Oh.
Because you can't whitewash everything that has happened in the United States history. And I said that as a joke, but then I explained to her, you don't be ashamed to be a white person.
Good.
But you need to understand that not everything was flowers and rainbows, and so.
And I was just going to say, and especially now I'm going to take my Paul history on, I put Paul the African American male's hat on for a minute here, just from my own experience again. Just as we know, everything is different experience, so even with my group. Having said that, that's always disturbed me when, and most of my friends growing up happened to be white, because of my social and school situation. I always felt uneasy when some of my white friends would say, I am ashamed to be white. Well, you shouldn't be. You didn't do all of this stuff. Yes, it's part of a systemic problem, etc. But you shouldn't be ashamed to be who you are.
Right.
So again, when you said that, I'm thinking,
No, I said that
I
as
knew
a
what you
joke
meant,
to
Carl,
her, and then
but
I
it's
came
just-
back and going, no,
Yeah.
you didn't do any of that. But But I said, but I'm not gonna apologize for bringing up
Yeah, absolutely.
everything that has occurred in United States history
Yeah.
as opposed to putting it under the rug,
Mhm.
you know?
And I think, again, speaking for myself and certainly, from my father's article, which obviously influenced the kind of historian I ended up being growing up in that environment. I mean, for me, I won't say the blessing, but the reason that I teach history and I think history is so important is because if we really learn it, we learn it honestly, and we have these conversations, we become better human beings. That history should change us as human beings, and it should change students into being able to see different points of view and different experiences and value different human beings. And if I do that, even if they don't remember the date of the French Revolution, I really feel like I've had a successful semester. If they come out being, empathetic and tolerant, and it doesn't mean accepting, they say, well, then we should never judge anybody. No, you judge. Like, that it doesn't mean you don't judge bad things, but that you can see different points of view and you understand tolerance and equality and social justice. My job is done, or my job, I'm doing it well if you pull some of those values out of the history class, and those skills.
And that's what I say too, is that the content's lovely, it's wonderful, but it's the process, it's the reasons, it's the interdependencies, it's your thinking process that I really want you to work
You're part of a world.
Right.
You're not just part of a local community or a particular race, you are part of a world.
Mhm.
And these are the connections, and this is why it matters,
Right.
that you see these connections.
Mhm.
So.
And if you have the kids feel something about history, have opinions about it, then and you might say something about this, but I have my Jacksonian Democracy unit is called AKA Why I Hate Jackson. And I don't shy away about the fact that this is my opinion about Jackson.
Sure,
Because I want them to be able to not shy away about their opinions.
right. Yep.
So, and that it's okay to have that.
What you're doing, guys, you're modeling, and that's great. I mean, I think that's wonderful. As a teacher, we should all be teacher, professor, anybody speak, any pedagogue should be doing that. Absolutely. And Jackson, I'm of two minds on Jackson too, because he clearly, he was quite brutal to his slaves. Yeah, absolutely. He was quite brutal to his slaves. We know that.
Apparently, he really was angry about the Civil War.
Yeah, but Jackson, to speak specifically about Jackson here, and yes, he was in the news recently, and I would tie that into my class. And again, I tend to, I try to engage my students in a slightly different way, but with the same end, just to let them know that I'm passionate about the subject. And I don't always say that I dislike Jackson. For example, when we talk even politics today, I'm always very careful to use examples from different sides and try not to inject my opinion in there. Because frankly, in my class, I do know that about half of my class is probably voted for Trump and half probably voted for Hillary in November. It's true. So I want them to think, but at the same time, I don't want them to, now my language teacher hat is on, I don't want the affective filter to kick in, Prescient's affective filter, where you get so wound up about something that you shut down and learn about it. So yeah, it's always that balance, and we as individuals, and yes, as teachers and professors, but also as just human beings, and of course there's big overlap. We have to go about it in the way that fits best for us and the way that we think we'll be able to connect best with our students.
But
The differentiation piece.
You give them a safe place to have those opinions about history, and then what you're saying is going to happen, where they go away realizing that history is important to the present and be more empathetic.
And you can have a civil discussion with people that you're really, viewpoints you may be opposed to. I mean, what they see modeled today is contempt and hatred and name-calling and not even really engaging with the real issues. Just, well, if you think that, you're un-American or you're and they don't see that you can have people who really disagree politically or disagree religiously or whatnot. You can sit down respectfully as two human beings and have a conversation. we don't see a lot of that modeled now in the news. And so the instinct is to just, well, you're wrong, I'm right, so, you know, you're a bad person.
But that happened in the 50s when McCarthy was.
Right, you know,
It happened
it's-
in the 20s.
Absolutely.
It happened during World War II. It happens all the time. And so when you haven't made those connections that this is not something new, it's gonna go away, and it'll come back again.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I talked to my students about after the election. There were people on both sides of the political, and it is a divide, unfortunately, except for there's some that are kind of in the middle that are trying to still bridge those gaps. It's interesting because I mentioned, especially in my US 2 class this semester, I said, yes, there are all kinds of protests. Whether they're right or wrong, I'm not going there because some may be right, some somewhere in between. But the point is, we have all these protests. We've got this, we've got violence. But I talk about 1968. I said 1968 was one hell of a year. That's before I was, the year before I was born, just 1 year before I was born. But Robert F. Kennedy's killed. Martin Luther King is killed. The riots at the Democratic Convention in Chicago, I show them the picture of Dan Rather, whatever we think of Dan Rather. Some people love him, some people don't really care for him as a journalist. But Dan Rather getting slugged in the gut by the security people. I show them that video, and, at the Democratic Convention in Chicago in '68. I said 68 was one hell of a year. Things were burning all over the place because after Dr. King got killed, we did have some people who took it out and did burn down parts of their communities out of anger and out of just a very raw negative emotion, whatever that may be. But I also showed them the other side, and we have to, oh no, I don't want to take up all the time.
Say,
I can
we
send
need
it
to
to
leave
you by
her at 11:20 so we can get.
11:20, okay.
Yeah,
Well, I'll just mention it, and what I'll do is I'll send everybody the link to it.
You have to walk outside, so.
No worries, yeah, yes, sir. So basically though, what I will do is I'll send everybody a link to this.
Yeah, the other
I
groups
have-
on there when
Well, we still got 3 minutes or so.
Yeah,
The
we do. Just kidding.
Annapolis, Maryland is where I grew up, which is where the Naval Academy is, state capital of Maryland. I don't know if anybody's been down there before. It's about, if the traffic's good, about 45 minutes roughly east of DC, about 45 south of Baltimore. But it's a small city. It's more like a small city than it is a big city. I mean, here I feel much more comfortable. My point is this, that after Dr. King got killed on April 4th of '68, Baltimore, parts of Baltimore were up in flames, National Guard was out, DC was up in flames.
We're gonna talk about RFK speech.
No, I'm talking about Dr. King getting killed.
Yes, RFK speech about not having,
Oh,
Not-
about not rioting.
not
Yeah,
rioting,
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And I actually show that in class, but the point is, and actually I do the Walter Cronkite that opened to CBS Evening News on April 4th of '68, and that's actually in that 1-minute montage. He shows RFK's speech actually. But that aside, where I grew up is one of the few places that did not have riots. And part of that was because the mayor, who happened to be white, and there was a community leader who happened to be black. At this time, unfortunately, he had done some things and was in prison, but he was still a community leader even from there. They were friends, childhood friends, despite segregation. They put their heads together and helped rioting from happening in Annapolis. So I tried to show, like you said, to make us better people, try to show the positive even in some kind of silver lining, even in that very, very dark cloud. So, and I find it's fascinating. There's a 10-minute, I'll send you the link to the whole, it's on YouTube. We still got it.
I've worked with them often
Yeah.
enough that.
No, we're good. I used to be a radio announcer too, so 60 seconds is an eternity. I did radio for 2 years, so I got my eye. Basically, with this, this particular documentary is incredibly eye-opening. And I show it in my multicultural curriculum design class as well. And it's not perfect, kind of like Mara was saying today. The town of Delight reminds me a lot of where I grew up, just the way that people tried to bridge that gap. And there was one public high school. But, you know, this particular documentary I really find is refreshing in a time of great uncertainty in our society. On both sides of the political divide. 25 seconds. This right here.
Yeah, but what if I wanted to say?
No, go ahead.
No, I'm
You wanna
just
finish?
throwing you off. No, I don't. I'm just trying.
All right. Politics, for me, is not a line, it's a circle. In my dissertation, I have something that talks about this, how the two extremes are actually closer. It's called Les Extrêmes se touchent, Louis Sébastien Mercier, 1785, Tableau de Paris. Basically talking about how the two extremes tend to touch each other. And I'll leave us on this point, that no matter how we feel about it, about 30% of those who voted for Bernie Sanders voted for Donald Trump. These extrêmes se touchent. People want to change, they don't care how it came in some cases. So again, make of it what we will, for, against, or whatever, but I find that it's very interesting, it's very instructive. And I let my students think about that. You know, whether they think it's a good thing, bad thing, in between, that's okay, but extremes touch each other. That's all I'd say.
Do we have your emails and everything in our packets? Do you know?
I don't know, but
Oh,
when we
yeah,
go
that'd
back,
be-
I was gonna say, when we go, if we all sort of sit in general, read, pass around a piece of paper,
That would be
and,
great.
you can, sort of create an email list, and I would say absolutely to contact us at any time if there's anything that we do. And if anyone wants to start doing a World Civ class, or if you have students who are really gung-ho on history, the upper level classes are open to them. My online upper level classes are
They are.
open, and I've had some wonderful high school kids, in them,
That's
and in the fall, it's history of women, like women's history, which,
Can I be a fly on the wall?
You can be, yeah.
I promise I won't talk the whole time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
But
you
we'll
very
lead
much.
you back, well, by now
Yeah,
you
we'll
know
reach
where we're
downstairs,
going.
yeah.